Is that so? Let's see if you can beat me then. Without further ado, Dustin shot forward. Then he turned into a shadow and attacked first. Dustin flicked his wrist as he got closer. Immediately, Celestial Blade exploded into thousands of sword shadows. Then, all of them rushed toward Nestor. Angry Iron first. Nestor yelled. A golden light burst out from his body. Instantly, it formed a 3 feet tall Iron Fist illusion. The Iron Fist illusion was like an armor protecting Nestor inside it. The sword shadows Dustin summoned flashed on the Iron Fist illusion. However, it only sent sparks flying and did not manage to break it. You can't even break my defense. How are you going to kill me? Nestor stood there with an arrogant and imposing aura. Without a word, Dustin continued to attack. As Celestial Blade slashed faster and faster, the sword shadows increased in numbers. When it collided with Iron Fist illusion, both sides produced energy shockwaves that surged outward like waves. The energy shockwaves got larger and more powerful than the last. Nestor didn't just defend, but also attacked back. His attacks were bold and powerful. Each of his attacks were strong enough to cause the ground to crack. Although Nestor had no weapons, he didn't lose against Celestial Blade. The two fought hard as the battle progressed. They sent attacks one after another. Although Nestor seemed disdainful, he was secretly shocked. Dustin's skills had improved immensely compared to a year ago. Back then, Nestor only needed a bit of effort to defend against Dustin's attacks. However, now, Nestor had to defend seriously against Dustin's attacks. The difference between the two battles was gaping. When Nestor and Dustin were engaged in a fierce battle, Anders stood behind them and watched intently. Anders was waiting for an opportunity. Once Dustin let his guard down, Anders would not hesitate to strike. In Anders' eyes, he didn't care what measures he took as long he could achieve his goal. In the end, it was the winner who would take all. It was an unspoken rule. Hey, I'm warning you, you better not mess around. If any of you do, I'll make sure you'll have a terrible death, Abigail warned. While saying that, she took out 2 green toxic bombs. Anders' eyelids twitched. Immediately, he backed away. A few commanders and their soldiers also quickly backed off. It was as if they had seen a snake. Abigail's poison had caused over 10,000 deaths. Not to mention that tens of thousands were still in a coma. Only less than half of the army of 100,000 were standing. In their eyes, Abigail was a vicious and ruthless force to be reckoned with. She was a much more terrifying existence than the Grim Reaper. As long as they weren't foolish, nobody would act recklessly at this moment. As for the battle before them, the sword shadows raged as golden light flew everywhere. Dustin and Nestor were still engaged in a fierce battle. Neither of them was able to gain an advantage. Meanwhile, the 4 top-notch powerhouses finally began their showdown on Quandary Mountain. Frost was the one who made the first move. Frost slowly drew out his sword. Then, he pointed the tip at Seth and started indifferently. Everyone says your swordsmanship is unparalleled, calling you the #1 swordsman. As a fellow swordsman, I don't believe it. That's why I will fight you today. Seth didn't answer him. Instead, he questioned, Frost, have you lost a battle before? Frost raised an eyebrow and answered, lost. Ever since I started practicing swordsmanship, I have never lost. You're lucky. However, it's a shame at the same time. Seth shook his head. The world consists of many things and a balance of opposites. There will be ups and downs in life. That's an unchanging rule. If you never experienced failure, how could you comprehend the meaning behind the way of the sword? Did you lose before? Frost questioned. Of course not. Seth denied. Frost was rendered speechless. It seemed that Seth was just uttering nonsense. Seth had a mixed expression. Although I've never lost a battle, I'm an utter loser as a person. In my early days, I only focused on sword training. Thus, I neglected many people and let many people down. In the end, I became a lonely man. Later, I hid my identity and lived a peaceful life in the fields. After I met someone I loved, I realized how beautiful life can be. Swordsmanship is way too boring. Seth, I'm so disappointed in you. You should be passionate about your sword as a swordsman. However, you said that it's boring. You're not worthy of the title Sword Whisperer. Frost replied angrily. Frost, try and let it go. Put down your sword and let go of your obsession. Find someone you like and have children. This life is way more meaningful than the path of the sword, Seth advised. This is your life. It has nothing to do with me. I want to beat everyone and become the #1 swordsman. Frost retorted. So what if you're #1? It's nothing but just a title. Seth shook his head. We're swordsmen. The sword doesn't control us. We can love the sword, but can't lose ourselves over it. Think about it. Do you still have family or friends that you're close to? Do you have someone you can confide in? Why are you uttering so much nonsense? Let's just fight. Frost grew impatient. Frost was there to battle with Seth, not to ask for advice. Frost wondered why Seth was nagging him so much. Since you want to fight, I don't mind. Bring it on. Seth didn't say anything more. Seth saw his younger self in Frost. That was why the former wanted to give him some advice. You two should just watch us fight from the side. Don't come over. This is a battle between me and Seth, Frost warned, turning around to look at Caesar and Eldershade. Mr. Bane, you should consider the situation right now. Don't act recklessly. Caesar muttered. If the three of them cooperated, they could take Seth down. However, Frost wanted to fight Seth alone. At that, Caesar wondered if he had gone mad. What, do you think I'll lose? Frost narrowed his eyes. I just think there's no need to take such a risk. We can definitely win if all of us work together. It's unwise for you to be so reckless. Caesar's expression was solemn. I'll be the new Sword Whisperer if I defeat Seth. Then, I'll go to Sacred Rhyme Summit and challenge the ancient sage. After that, I can become the #1 swordsman on Earth. Frost was filled with ambition. Mr. Bane. Caesar was about to say something, but Frost interrupted him. That's enough. I've already made up my mind. If you guys dare to disturb our battle, I won't go easy on you guys. When Caesar heard that, his expression turned grim. Initially, Caesar thought it was a no-brainer they could win. He didn't expect a situation like this to happen. Once Frost was defeated, there was a high chance they would lose. It would be troublesome if that happened. Mr. Fent, don't worry. Mr. Bane's skills are not inferior to those of the Sword Whisperer. Remember the battle that made Mr. Bane famous 8 years ago? It had shaken the world. Not even the Sword Whisperer had such a famed moment before. As the Guildmaster of Frostbane Citadel, Frost had the reputation of being able to defend the city alone. No foreign enemy had dared to invade during his reign. 8 years ago, 100,000 barbarian soldiers tried to attack the city on the northern border. They intended to burn, kill, and plunder Frostbane Citadel's citizens. Back then, Frost stood alone at the city gate. He had faced the onslaught of 100,000 soldiers with just his sword. With just his sword, he broke through all layers of defense. The sky and the earth trembled, and all the soldiers fled the scene. Since that battle, the small town was formally renamed Frostbane Citadel. As for Frostbane, he became the leader of the Citadel. Until today, the residents of the Citadel lived and worked happily and peacefully. Seth might have been famous, but he'd been living under the radar for the past decade. His past glory was long forgotten. Frost was living a completely different life as he trained and continued improving his skills with each passing day. As such, no one knew for sure who would win this battle. Martial artists will always be martial artists. They'll never look at the big picture. If you like to win this much, let's see what you've got. Caesar narrowed his eyes with a gloomy expression. He didn't care if Frost would die in the battle. All he cared about was for Frost to exhaust Seth's strength. It'd be helpful if Seth were exhausted from the battle. It'd be best if both of them were severely injured after the battle. However, this scenario was highly unlikely. anyone who had never fought with. Seth could never comprehend the hopelessness when faced with his might. Before the battle began, Caesar was confident he could at least last 100 rounds. However, he barely lasted 3 rounds. They were both known for being very skilled martial artists on the astonishing world list. However, the gap between them was just abyssal. Frost may be good, but he was only 8th on the list. There was a real gap between him and Seth, who ranked 3rd on the list. Regardless, he had already made up his mind that he'd help when it was necessary. Seth Hughes, this sort of mind was forged from the strongest steel, and it is named Starshine. It's 4 feet long and 2 inches wide. It has tasted the blood of countless warriors. Frost took out his sword and showed it to the people around him. There was a blue glow surrounding the long sword and its sharp blade. It emanated a cold aura. That's a good sword. Seth couldn't help but admire the sword. He lifted his sword with one hand and held it in front of his chest, horizontally as he introduced his sword. This is the Dragon Sparrow sword. It's been with me for the past 20 years, and it has destroyed everything it came across. This is the best sword in the world. It's a great sword. Frost slowly lifted his sword, Starshine, and said coldly, "Nevertheless, it solely depends on the bearer of the sword to truly wield its full potential. Today, I'll experience the true skills of the Sword Whisperer." After finishing his sentence, Frost rushed forward as he became one with his sword. The attack might have appeared slow, but it was actually too fast that human eyes could never catch up with it. The attacker would appear before the opponent in the blink of an eye. It was as if they had traveled through time, catching their opponent off guard. They would die instantly if they lost focus for even a moment. Most importantly, everything in the sword's path would be frozen. The extreme coldness it created would significantly impact the speed and reaction of the opponent. What a bizarre tactic. He hasn't yet revealed his true potential, but he's already this strong. What a sneaky and dangerous move. Caesar was secretly scared. He had underestimated Frost's true potential. Interesting? Seth smiled calmly and didn't avoid the attack as he pointed his sword forward. The Dragon Sparrow sword transformed into a golden light and surged ahead. A loud explosion could be heard. Frost's Starshine clashed vehemently with the Dragon Sparrow sword. A huge wave of energy was generated when the tips of the swords collided. The surge of energy rippled outward and left a trail of destruction as it broke rocks and trees. The surrounding walls of the scenic monastery, which were located far away, started crumbling. The building shook in the wake of the energy ripple. At the base of the mountain, the crowd heard a loud explosion. When they looked up, they saw a bright ring of light in the sky. The sky turned dark as the sun was hidden behind the clouds. The people in that area could feel the terrifying pressure even though they were far from the battle. It was good that the battle was on the top of the mountain. If it had happened near the crowd, there would have been a lot of casualties. Frost didn't stop after the first attack. Instead, he immediately followed up with another vicious attack. The first move was just to test the waters. The following rounds would be the real sword battle. Frost held his sword in one hand and continued his violent attack. He was moving so fast that no one could see where he was moving as they saw only shadows. Even Caesar and Elder Shade couldn't keep up. Frost's sword skills were very particular, and all his moves were unpredictable. Even in just one attack, he could move as he liked. It was safe to say that his skills had been perfected to a godlike state. Frost would have easily defeated any ordinary grandmother with his relentless attack. Unfortunately for him, his opponent this time was the Sword Whisperer, Seth Hughes. Regardless of his attacks, Seth could block his onslaught effortlessly with the Dragon Sparrow sword. The most important fact was that Seth hadn't even moved an inch to avoid his attacks. Seth used a special ability and the Dragon Sparrow sword to defuse all of Frost's attacks. It was apparent who the stronger fighter was. Seth had already stopped practicing his sword skills for the past 10 years. I wouldn't expect him to be as skilled as before. It looks like Frost is in trouble, Elder Shade said creepily. I already told him that a solo battle wouldn't cut it. He didn't want to listen. I want to see how he'll handle this mess on his own. Caesar looked annoyed. Seth appeared very relaxed and didn't even seem to be giving his all in the battle. In other words, Seth thought that Frost's attacks were not worth his true power. This was the real difference. Mr. Fent, if the battle continues like this, it's possible that Frost might lose. Should we help? Elder Shade sent a telepathic message. It's not time yet. Stay put for now. Caesar also replied via telepathy. Seth is still very alert and defensive. Even if we attack him together, it'd be useless. We must let Frost tire him out. We'll attack when he finally uses his killer move. It's the only effective way to do this. You're right. Then we shall continue to wait. I believe that Frost still has some tricks up his sleeves, Elder Shade replied. In the battle before them, Frost had already used most of his powerful attacks, but Seth still remained unscathed. Seth was still blocking his attacks with Jest, one hand to control the Dragon Sparrow sword. After a while, Seth finally spoke up. Frost, my patience is wearing thin. Please show me all your best moves. If the fight continues, I don't think you'll have any chance even to attack. Fine, if you're already impatient, I'll show you my latest killer move. Frost took a deep breath, and the sword in his hand suddenly a cold aura. With a flick of his wrist, he drew a formation in the air with his sword. The sword left a blue trail after every movement. When the blue trails were combined, an intricate formation materialized. This was the special hexagonal formation. Colorful lights and water flowed freely in the formation. It was a captivating sight as it dimmed and glowed. Out, Frost thrusted Starshine into the formation. A loud buzz could be heard as a gigantic ice sword came out, slowly from the middle of the hexagonal formation. The ice sword was 12 feet long and 5 feet wide. It brought terrifying chills to those near it. It was as if it was a sword from the depths of hell. The coldness spread quickly, and in one breath, it had already reached a few hundred feet away. Everything in its way was frozen. Even strong fighters like Caesar and Elder Shade shivered involuntarily when the cold air swept over them. What technique is this? I've never seen this before. Caesar looked bewildered. Frost's ice sword wasn't derived from his internal energy. Instead, it was brought into existence through the formation. As such, it was very powerful and could potentially destroy the earth. It was likely that even the Sword Whisperer couldn't withstand attacks from this sword. This sword is called the Destroyer. I've maintained this sword in extreme cold for 8 years with the sole purpose of defeating you. This sword can only attack once. After that, the sword will be demolished completely. Seth Hughes, do you think you can take a hit from this sword? Frost held the sword with both of his hands. There was an unknown but terrifying force hidden in the sword. Frost's hands were shaking slightly without him knowing. This attack was do or die. You'll find out if I can take the hit when you attack, Seth replied calmly. All right then, I'll let you have a taste of the true power of the Destroyer. Frost shouted as his internal energy flowed into the Destroyer. Then he stomped his feet on the ground. After a loud explosion, a hole appeared in the ground. As for Frost, he was rushing toward Seth with the Destroyer. Everything in its path became ice. It didn't matter if it was a plant or a gaseous substance. As for Seth Hughes, the target of this attack, he could already feel an invisible pressure before the Destroyer got any closer. He had never felt this for a long time. It was undeniable that he had to use his true power to block Frost's attack. Seth raised his sword with the flick of his finger. The Dragon Sparrow sword, which was floating midair, suddenly shone brightly. Go! Seth moved his sword forward. The Dragon Sparrow sword transformed into a golden dragon as it sped toward the Destroyer with a roar. It was as if time had stopped when the swords collided. From afar, the Dragon Sparrow's sword glittered in gold, and the Destroyer shimmered in blue. The gold and blue light from each sword illuminated the sky. This scene looked fascinating yet peculiar. In the blink of an eye, the gold and blue light slowly fused together. Then, a loud explosion could be heard. At that moment, the sky turned dark, and the wind started howling. An extremely terrifying surge of energy exploded abruptly, leaving a loud echo. The scenic monastery on top of the mountain was reduced to rubles by the surge of energy. Even Quandary Mountain started quaking violently. There were a lot of rocks that rolled down from the mountain and killed a lot of unfortunate beings. At the base of the mountain, the soldiers hurriedly fled from the scene. The whole situation was a chaos. After the explosion, it was chaotic at the base of the mountain. However, it was eerily silent on top of the mountain. When the dust settled, the whole top of Quandary Mountain was bald. It was as if a typhoon had torn through the top. The scenic monastery was nothing but rubble, and most of the plants were uprooted. Even Caesar and Eldershade, who were observing from the side, had to retreat further to avoid the aftermath of the explosion. At this moment, Seth stood quietly in the middle of the mountaintop. The dragon sparrow's sword glittered and floated in front of him, a few yards away. Frost's shimmering blue sword was stuck to the ground while he looked very pale. The skin between his thumb and index finger was slashed open, and fresh blood dripped onto the rock. His arms were trembling involuntarily. Frostbane, you've lost, Seth said casually. Your sword skills are amazing, but unfortunately, you're still not too weak. Who said I lost? With a determined look, Frost said through gritted teeth, I still have one more trick up my sleeve. If you can block this attack, I'll never practice swords anymore. Why would you do that? Seth frowned slightly. You're still young and have many options. Why would you torture yourself this way? If I can't be the first, my life would be meaningless. Frost said nothing else as he forcefully pulled Starshine out from the ground and thrust forward. As he attacked, a sudden and heavy bloody mist appeared around the surface of his body. There was a huge energy in the bloody mist, absorbing the spiritual energy around it. At that moment, Frost's aura was transformed instantly. His speed and strength increased exponentially. The strength of his internal energy was escalated to another level as well. In a quick glance, it was as if he had reached a whole new level. Fuck, Frost is really risking his life. Eldershade yelled out in surprise when he saw what was happening. Eldershade, get ready, here's our chance. Instead of shock, Caesar looked happy. He was ready to fight. It was difficult to defeat Seth in a one-on-one battle. They could only win by using sneak attacks. They would have to injure him when he least expected it. Did you have to drain your core energy and ruin the fruits of your training? Seth sighed softly. The bloody mist surrounding Frost was a result of him draining his core energy. Using this method would increase his power momentarily. However, his body would be seriously injured regardless of the battle's outcome. This injury would be very grave and irreversible. This was very risky as they would have to put their life and martial arts skills on the line. They could deal a great blow to their enemy but would have to sustain a more serious injury themselves. This method should only be used in extremely dire circumstances, as no sane person would use this method casually. Clearly, Frost, a sword fanatic, could no longer be considered normal. Final death blow. Frost let out a low growl, and the bloody mist surrounding him grew bigger. The bloody mist enveloped his body and Starshine. All of a sudden, Starshine became a huge crimson sword. Frost rushed toward Seth with all his destructive might. Seth suddenly looked more serious when he saw Frost's new attack. He quickly drew a small gold formation in the air and used it on the dragon sparrow sword. The sword let out a soft buzz and suddenly glowed, gold and bright with a blinding brilliance. Seth pointed the sword forward. As soon as he did that, the dragon sparrow sword transformed into a gold light and flew out rapidly. Once again, it collided heavily with Frost's crimson sword. The collision resulted in a deafening explosion and sent everything flying. When the swords collided, Frost's crimson sword exploded into a bloody mist. As for Frost, he lay several feet away with a pale face and blood trickling out from the corner of his mouth. The dragon sparrow sword was sent flying far away in a different direction as well. It then got stuck in a huge rock. Great, now's our chance. Caesar's eyes lit up when he saw that the dragon sparrow sword was out of control temporarily. He quickly launched his attack without any delay. He put an arrow to his bow and channeled his internal energy into the arrow. The arrow turned black, emitting a black light and extreme chills surrounding it. As it quickly gathered momentum, the black arrow was transformed into a sharp, black light as it was aimed at Seth's chest. It was a fast and deadly shot. There was no warning, and it was fired at the right time. It could be said that it was the perfect sneak attack. Let's see how you can dodge this. Caesar snickered cruelly. Seth might be the sword whisperer, but he had a huge weakness. He was afraid of others getting close to him. Due to the collision earlier, he had temporarily lost control of the dragon sparrow sword. Now that he had no weapon with him, he was defenseless. As for Caesar, he saw the weakness as his opening to defeat Seth with an arrow. Elder Shade started his attack as well when Caesar launched his sneak attack. Elder Shade transformed himself into a black mist and disappeared into the shadows. When he reappeared, he was already standing behind Seth. A sharp metal claw reached out from the black mist and went straight for Seth's back. It was silent but deadly. When the black arrow was close to hitting Seth's chest, Seth reached out to stop the arrow by lightly holding it between his fingers. The powerful black arrow stopped suddenly, and its shaft shocked. Nevertheless, it was unable to move forward. As he caught the arrow, Seth turned around and grabbed Elder Shade's metal claw. Seth defused their killer moves easily. It had no effects on him. Caesar was extremely shocked to see that. Elder Shade was also very shocked as he abandoned his weapon and fled after transforming into a black mist. They had no idea that Seth could deflect attacks effectively and emerge unscathed even without the dragon sparrow sword. They had already put their best effort into the sneak attack. What they thought was their best killer move was just child's play in Seth's eyes. He didn't need a sword. He only needed to flick his fingers to completely defeat them. The gap between them was just too huge. Do you think your little tricks will work on me? The black arrow exploded when Seth pinched harder on it. He was regarded as the sword whisperer for his skills, and not because he owned the dragon sparrow sword. Not to exaggerate, Seth could still show off his unparalleled sword skills without a sword. All he needed was a twig or even a strand of hair. There was suddenly a thunderous roar in the sky. Following the roar, a red spear pierced through the clouds and flew at Seth. This attack was out of the blue and very shocking. The spear moved so fast that it seemed to distort time and space, leaving the mountains quaking in its trail. It came rushing down as if it was a powerful and destructive punishment from heaven. Seth's face ashened when he saw the spear. Alaric. Seth's eyes widened as the fiery red spear pierced the sky. In an instant, he recognized the silhouette of the unexpected visitor. The attack had a startling speed, catching Seth off guard. Unable to summon his dragon sparrow sword in time, he had to resort to using his finger as an improvised blade against the incoming fiery red spear. A thunderous collision reverberated through the air. His fingertip met the spearhead, and it released a powerful wave of energy that rippled outward. The entire scene seemed to freeze at that moment, adding a dramatic intensity. Seth held his arm up. Then a golden sword rippled as it emanated from his fingertip in defiance of the fiery red spear. A luminous spectacle unfolded as the golden sword rippled. The fiery red spear clashed, forming circles of energy that emitted a radiant glow. At the spear shaft stood a white-haired older man with crimson eyes, poised on the weapon as though it were an extension of him. His gaze bore down on Seth with an air of superiority. He was Alaric, Chief Guildmaster of the Dragon Guard and the formidable second on the astonishing world list, Mr. Draken. Caesar couldn't conceal his elation. As the ancient sage at the Sacred Rhyme Summit chose a path of seclusion, Chief Guildmaster Alaric of the Dragon Guard claimed the title, making him unrivaled. while others were equal on the astonishing world list. Their difference with Alaric was immense. Their capabilities fell short even in dealing with Seth. How would they fare when faced with the formidable might of Alaric? Fortunately, they were on the same side as him. The arrival of Alaric decisively shifted the balance of power, stabilizing the current situation. Even with Seth's exceptional abilities, the challenge before him may be too much for him to handle. Thank God you arrived. Otherwise, we'd be in dire straits. Alder Shade, concealed in shadows, voiced his relief. Who'd have thought this old beast would make a grand entrance? Frost observed from a distance, his expression grave. Blood continued to trickle from the corner of his mouth after the fight. Seth clearly outmatched them. The outcome now depended on the clash between Alaric and Seth. Alaric, a big shot like you should know better. Interrupting my fight. Seriously. You're turning this whole thing into a joke. Seth's tone was cold and sharp as he spoke. If you meet your end, who's left to tell the tale? Alaric retorted, devoid of emotion. Do you have what it takes to finish me off? Seth showed no hint of fear. Ignorant fool. Alaric snorted, leaping into the air. Coming down with force, he stomped on the shaft of the Inferno Fury Spear. An explosion echoed. The Inferno Fury Spear thrust forward, exerting subtle pressure on Seth's arm and cracking the ground beneath his feet. Dragon Sparrow. Seth's other hand summoned the Dragon Sparrow sword that was inserted into the rock, pulled it out, changed its trajectory, and thrust it toward Alaric. That's a feeble attempt. Alaric made no effort to evade, extending his hand like a claw to halt the dragon. Sparrow soared a few feet away from him. The sword vibrated intensely, emitting audible hums, but couldn't make further headway. Seth drew a deep breath, mustering strength for another push. The vibrations intensified, and the dazzling golden light burst forth. The once frozen sword slowly advanced, homing in on Alaric's chest. Alaric hummed and furrowed his brows, surprise flickering in his eyes. Seth's strength proved unexpectedly strong, matching his spiritual energy. The sharp sword aura, particularly challenging to control with one hand, added to the intrigue. Alaric was faced with two options, either to amplify his strength for a decisive strike with the Inferno Fury Spear, risking potential injury, or tactically withdraw, leveraging his advantages to wear down Seth steadily and prevent any comeback. After a brief contemplation, Alaric opted for the latter.